So I asked all of you to name the cards you hate in Marvel Snap. The things that steal games, the things that frustrate you, things that your opponent does to take all your cubes. And man, as you guys deliver, I've got the 10 most hated cards in Marvel Snap in this video. And the 3 behind me didn't even make the cut. These were numbers 11, 12, and 13. I thought for sure that Iceman was going to be on this list, ruining your combo by making Wong cost too much mana or something. But sure enough, these were outside the top 10. There were 10 more hated. So let's kick it off with the 10th most hated card, and a really surprising one at that. It's Patriot? Patriot? Really? People hate Patriot? I didn't think this was a particularly oppressive sort of card. He is also going to show up on the most loved cards list in a future video, so that one made more sense to me, but just enough people hated Patriot to include him. Some of the comments left on the survey included because I don't know how to counter him, or I have every card for a Patriot deck except for Patriot, but the opponent has him in a large percentage of games. I wouldn't really consider this an uncounterable card. Certainly landed some enchantresses on Patriots in my day. I guess maybe sometimes going into turn 6, depending on reveal priority, might be hard to enchantress a Patriot. Maybe your deck doesn't have it, etc. So I guess it could feel frustrating in those ways, but I also don't think this is like a big surprising card or like a crazy high power output sort of card. Things like Silver Surfer can be a little tougher to read sometimes as a big buff. This one kind of shows its hand early, playing a lot of non-ability cards early in the game. So just all in all, this one absolutely surprised me. I do think something else is captured here, though. When you see your opponent having an awesome big build-around card like Patriot that's super fun looking, and it's like, oh man, I want to play that deck, and you don't have it, that can be a pretty constant reminder of what you're missing. So sometimes those cards that look awesome and fun and enjoyable and are able to put a bunch of other cards you can't use, like all those non-ability cards, into play, having that regular reminder of just how far your collection is behind, that could feel pretty tough. So maybe that's captured here a little bit in the data too. So moving on to the number 9 spot, what do you know? It's Silver Surfer. Far less surprised by this one. This card is just absolutely everywhere right now. Many top meta decks are able to use Silver Surfer. He's got a couple different ways to find success. Even Patriot decks now are running Silver Surfer sometimes. And when you see a card everywhere and it's a card that's beating you over and over again, that often creates a lot of frustration. So not surprising at all for me that this one's a fairly hated card. Also, I think there's a little bit of a divide here between paying players and purely free-to-play players, since this is a season pass card. You see that here in the comments. I'm a free-to-play player, so I often lose to this powerful card that I can't obtain. It hurts. So between both the power level, the game-ending nature of this, and sometimes that cost difference that a lot of people think trends toward pay to win, is definitely a recipe for a lot of ire with Silver Surfer. I absolutely understand why this card made the list. So next up here we have Shang-Chi, one of a handful of tech style cards that are going to appear on this video. Tech cards being things that are answers to specific sorts of plays. So Shang-Chi killing big stuff, Enchantress killing ongoing, Cosmo killing on reveal cards. Shang-Chi, perhaps one of the lesser hated tech cards, but still can be really frustrating when you make some awesome big play, something you're really excited about and proud of. I got a big 12 power unit, a big 18 power Thanos, and crap, it's dead. That's the comment here. Nice, cool, big guy you got there. Oh, never mind. And someone else put that Shang-Chi is really for them a proxy for all of the coin flip tech cards. Shang-Chi, Killmonger, Enchantress, to name a few. Tech cards should not be this strong. If tech cards this powerful are required to balance the game, the dev team does something wrong in my eyes. So I think a lot of people perhaps just frustrated in general with tech cards. That's a hard conversation to have. They're important to exist. Otherwise, certain things will just run away with the meta. And cards like this do give people answers with a lower collection level against sometimes things that show up in later collection levels. So arming, newer players with tools to handle big scary things is important. Power level can be discussed, of course, but I do think cards like this probably need to exist in Marvel Snap. But trust me, I too have had many frustrating moments where Shang-Chi has stolen a game out from under me, and that makes me pretty sad. Oh boy, moving on here, we've got Scorpion, and I do hate Scorpion. I don't know what it is about this guy, but it's just so frustrating to have a Scorpion played against you. It's one of those things where, the power difference isn't usually that significant. Yes, it might be like -4 power across your hand or something, but the fact that it's kind of dispersed across cards, I mean, you're only usually losing maybe like 1 power per lane. How often is that a significant breakpoint that loses you a game? Occasionally, but not most games. But it just feels wrong to have all of your cards weaker. I just hate that, and it's so common too. This card's in a lot of different decks. Kind of one of the good card packages. We got this and other things like Blizzard and Armor and all these cards, Iceman, that just show up over and over again. This to me feels like the most frustrating of those to see over and over and over. And also, I think a lot of people here that named Scorpion in particular were Cerebro players. This kept showing up in the comments here. Very underrated card in terms of annoyance, but the -1 power for cards in hand feels terrible every time, especially in Cerebro decks. And somebody else wrote, he makes my Cerebro deck worse. So Scorpion might actually be a little overrepresented here just because all of the Cerebro players out there really hate this card, because suddenly when the power levels are changing, that makes their Cerebro buffs not hit all of those cards in hand, which can really significantly lower their output. So suddenly instead of -1, it might be -3 or -5 if they're also rocking some Mystiques, which is a big difference compared to that meager -1. So I'm actually kind of shocked Scorpion wasn't a little higher on this list, all things considered, but not surprised at all to see him. Hey, real quick before we move on, I'd like to talk about our sponsor for this video. It's Moonbreaker. Moonbreaker is a super fun strategy game with miniatures. It's made by the folks who made Subnautica, which is one of my absolute all-time favorite games, and the world and lore are created by Brandon Sanderson, a famed fantasy author many of you may know. And on top of that awesome pedigree is actually a really good game. I've been streaming it on Twitch for the last few months. Basically, you assemble a roster of miniatures that all have different stats and abilities, and then you battle it out against either PvE or PvP opponents trying to take down the enemy captain. Oh, and you get to paint your miniatures if you want, which is really fun. So if you want to check out the game, there's a link in my description to the Steam store page. You can read some reviews, see more videos, read more about it. It's currently 20% off for a limited time, so go check out that sale. I've also included a link to my stream VODs down in the description as well. If you just want to see me having fun playing the game, see more gameplay, check those out as well. Moving on, we've got Professor X. And yeah, this card captures, I think, a theme that will show up over and over again in this video already a little bit, and even more as we move on. Anytime the player starts to lack agency, the ability to control their fate, to make decisions, anytime that goes away because of a card the opponent played, that's gonna be a card you hate. And of course, Professor X locking down a location steals your ability to do things. You can't make decisions, you can't play cards there, you can't contest that lane, and sometimes it feels like, man, they kind of got a freebie just because I was waiting to play there later, and suddenly all my decision making, all my strategy is thrown out the window because of this single card. And that lack of agency is gonna show up over and over again as a frustrating element. Someone wrote, cards like him and Cosmo basically turn off lanes in a game where one only has 3 lanes to play. It sucks. And that's kind of true. It's removing a third of the game's relevance all on its own. Somebody else puts it, this card feels worse than Leech or Leader. Once your opponent plays him, you either win or lose at that location. No more interactions with cards there. And people like interactions. They like the back and forth. They like having the opportunity to do nifty things. Professor X limits that opportunity and therefore becomes a pretty hated card. So next up here we have Killmonger, or is it more like Killjoy, as somebody put it. This one is a bit of a special case among tech cards, I think. He's really moved beyond that status a little bit. Just a great card for so many different decks. Great with Silver Surfer now, for instance. But the interesting thing about Killmonger is most of the tech cards are there to kind of answer one thing or maybe one location at best, like Shang-Chi or Enchantress or Cosmo. But Killmonger just has this universal utility across all lanes, and he can really shut down entire archetypes like Kazoo decks that are running a bunch of one cost units. So just entire game plan is wiped out. I've been playing some Thanos recently. Killmongers can just take out my entire board of Infinity Stones. It's kind of insane just how much this card can do all on his own. Not to mention, this card also has some proactive utility as well, not just reactive utility, because you can use this to snipe off your own Novas or Hoods or whatever. So great tool for destroy decks as well to enable some of those synergies. So utility basically across the board for a variety of different decks. This is honestly one of the absolute best cards in Marvel Snap. I don't know if that alone is a reason to hate it. I think probably this shows up so much because he's such a great counter to so many early pool Kazoo Kazar style decks. That's likely why he's showing up so prominently here and so high on this list. But I do understand the hate for this one. Killmonger is really, really good. So next up is Arrow, and boy, oh boy, another card here that's stealing agency from the player. You want to play your cards in the right location because there's some awesome thing you want to do in the right location, and yeah, sadly Arrow is moving them to the left location, absolutely screwing you in the process very often. And then sometimes, of course, Arrow is just an instant win button where the opponent is moving your cards into a location that you're already winning, basically wasting perhaps your final turn and sealing the deal for them. So it has disruption, it has like game winning potential, and frankly it's also just a good stat too at 8 power. Sometimes just playing this down for the stats works well for opponents because they're not really sacrificing too much for a 5 cost play. So Arrow is just really good across the board. That's why we see her showing up in so many different decks. So between that power level, that meta pervasiveness, and the disruption that again is removing all of your decision making, really limiting your control over the game, I am not at all shocked that Arrow is on this list and so high on this list. I completely get it. Somebody wrote, losing the ability to choose where to play is extremely tilting. Good stats with strong ability. Just hate the power level, I think. Arrow is very difficult to read with a very strong effect. On top of having decent stats, it can steal a game so easily with very little counterplay. And yeah, those are all great summaries for why Arrow is a card that's probably going to get nerfed. I can't imagine this card not getting a change. It was actually released as a 5/6. We might see it going back to that point, so the stats aren't quite as crazy for an effect that's so good. So moving into the top 3. None of them are going to surprise you. They're exactly the cards that you think they are. At number 3, quite appropriate, we have the 3/3 Cosmo. And how can you guys hate such a cute dog? Shame on all of you. He's too cute to be on the most hated list. Somebody in fact wrote, he is a good doggo, but I don't want to be playing decks that are just counter meta and counter everything. I want to play with my deck, with my strategy, with my gameplay. And again, we see that same conversation when players lose control over their cards and the ability to do what they want their cards to do. That becomes a pain point, and that's when cards show up on the most hated list. This person says Cosmo is in every game, best tech card in any game. Cosmos is better than any card in any game apparently as a tech card. I don't know if I go that far, but it can certainly feel that way when he shuts down your odd reveal deck synergies or shuts down your big Silver Surfer or whatever your game plan is. This is a pretty funny one. Completely neuters a lot of decks. That cannot be an accident there with the word choice. It has no real way of being countered because it prevents Enchantress activations. That's one thing I do find a little bit frustrating about Cosmo. You can't really work around it once it's there. A lot of, other tech cards or effects you can kind of protect. If you're worried about Shang-Chi, you can play down an armor. If a Cosmo goes down, you don't really have any way to influence it. You could maybe try to move it out of the way with some cards, but even that's like Magneto's the only one that's really doing that. So how do you deal with it? You kind of just don't. You sort of just have to take it when it comes to Cosmo. Very popular card, very good card, and very frustrating card. So moving on to number 2, you already knew it was going to be Leech. You already know his big green brother's going to be number 1. As one of you put it, and even though I can't say it, he's a little. Why is he a little? Because his ability removes and denies the fundamental part of what makes Marvel Snap great, playing distinct cards for their abilities. That's a real move. Somebody else said it's a no skill card like that Leader. So there you have it. You guys nailed it. Leech is an absolute. And then at number 1, we have his big green brother with the fattest head of all. Everybody knew Leader was going to be here. In fact, this is the most one-sided vote I've ever had in these videos. I've been doing these for Hearthstone for like the last 5 years. Leader had over 40% of the total votes, almost half, which is unheard of. Usually these peak at like 15 or 20% for the most hated card. Leader was absolutely crazy. Not quite a majority, but a huge plurality. And yeah, everybody knows, as this person put it, it leads me to anger. That's all the leading that's being done. We had another just very succinctly put, Leader. That's appropriate. A lot of puns and frustration around the fact that he's got a big brain apparently, but it's actually a brain dead play according to this person. It takes so much work to play around, plus it's always the last thing you see. It's never a feel good and always a feel bad. So yes, I know many of you will say I can beat Leader, my deck beats Leader. We get it. We all can beat Leader if we're playing the right deck. The problem is there are so many decks that can't, and Leader becomes this universal catch-all that just feels like it steals so many wins out from under you without really having any sort of game plan or directive behind it, other than just like, hey, if I'm ahead or close to ahead, Leader's probably going to do some great work, which for a big-headed guy might be appropriate, but man, it absolutely sucks. Leader is my most hated card in Marvel Snap. I don't hate him as much as some of you, but he would be number 1 on my list as well. And apparently a lot of you feel the same way, because he was far and away the number 1 most hated card in the game. And there you go, folks. Those are the 10 most hated cards in Marvel Snap. I still cannot believe Patriot was on this list. I can't believe Iceman was lower than Patriot. I thought Hela might show up too. All those like surprise Hela wins where they dump 40 stats and stuff. Those can be pretty tough to deal with. But sure enough, here's your list. What do you guys think? Which cards were number 1 for you? Why do you hate them? Share all those thoughts and more in the comments below. Stay tuned for the most loved cards of Marvel Snap in a future video. I think there are at least a couple repeats on there, so that's going to be fun to discuss. Thanks so much as always for watching, and until next time, game on.